To open this debate.
Mr. Speaker, this debate is going to be about what state and what is the true meaning of protecting the security for citizens and what is the role of state when it comes to met. The opening government today would like to propose to you why spying on its citizens is not a legitimate role that state should take and why it should be banned because it does not guarantee the full protection of citizens. We think that this actually further harms the protection and the sense of security the citizen can feel. So the very context that we're talking about in this debate is very simple. We're talking about wiretapping and emails, right? The kind of activities the state do to preempt certain kind of threats that are not even confirmed and disclosed clearly to the citizens. And we're talking about spying on its citizens just as it says, right? Active infringement upon the very ordinary citizens, Mr. Speaker, right? So for this being clearly said, I'm going to move on to I'm going to talk about two things in this debate. Firstly, I'm going to talk about what is the premise of free society and why this motion actually goes against this on a principle level and also on the further level, why this actually harms the sense of security that citizens deserve to have, Mr. Speaker. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about more harm on this issue. So now let me move on to my first argument. Mr. Speaker, we think that the state we think that we're living in a free society. That is a very premise that we live under when we're living in a liberal democracy society. What does this mean? It means that the government is guaranteeing a full protection to the citizen in exchange for their freedom, right? And in that sense, citizens give a certain amount of their freedom to their government so that their rights, the very fundamental rights that decide the quality of their life, such as right to privacy, such as right to interact with the people without being spied upon or without being threatened upon on an everyday basis, right? And that is the exact meaning of why we have a social contract. It's not something that's very abstract, Mr. Speaker. We think that it happens on a very daily basis, on a very everyday level, when citizens want to interact on the kind of issues that matter to them is put upon safely to their hands, not being heard by other people and not being threatened by other people, right? So in a value level, we think that actually going against this is very inherent harm to the citizens. Why? Because then what you're making a premise is that every ordinary citizen is somewhat guilty and is in the state of being suspected by their government. But we think that this is not the way that liberal democratic governments actually treat their citizens. Because if you look at criminal justice system, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about like Miranda rights, even a suspect that is really, really clearly, being doubted as a criminal of a particular crime scene, we give them the right to, not to speak, and right to hire their lawyers, right to speak until the court is provided to them, and the right environment is given to them, right? And we think that this is, why we say, every citizen is guilty until proven justice, right? Mr. Speaker, we think that this kind of premise is applicable to everyday situation because all citizens the government trusts are proven innocent, right? So moving on to the second level of analysis in a moment, what protects citizens more and what gives a true sense of security. Now the opposition side is going to come up and talk about, look, we're going to provide a national security. But we're going to give you two analysts upon this, but before I go on, yes.
So are you also opposing the value of censorship and also those very offensive searchings on Google and also posting those things on your blog for the sake of national security as well?
Mr. Speaker, we censor these materials upon the fact that there's a direct harm that we see in these activities when these activities directly harm the life of citizens. We're talking about our government preemptively thinking that this kind of activity is harm without it being actually confirmed that there is a harm. So then in that sense, you're doubting every citizen on the very active basis, on the very active judgment that the government thinks is harmful. So in this case, we think that the kind of religious minorities or the kind of acts that are not proven standard by the government is also prone to be judged, and we don't think this is what a free society, free democracy society is about. So moving on to my second argument about national security. Mr. Speaker, we think that radical and extreme events happen anywhere that citizens cannot expect, right? We think that in the US, we have same amount of rape cases as much as in many Middle Eastern countries, right? We think that these kind of radical activities all do guarantee our security, but a true amount of security also comes from overall amount of accumulated security that you feel about your everyday life and the kind of trust that you can give to your government that has taken away your right? Because we think that the national security, the sense of abstract, general sense of national security doesn't come to citizens right away. The kind of security that comes to citizens right at the skin level, is when you actually feel like what you're doing is being trusted by your government, and that your government actually allows you to feel mutual trust to what you do, right? Especially when we're talking about the issue of wiretapping, we think that the government actually does not disclose the purpose of what they're wiretapping for, right? They don't say that if you say these things, we might doubt you. No, right? Like, we think that these kind of purposes are actually not disclosed from the citizens, right? And we think that when these purposes are not disclosed, what citizens come down to them is more insecurity, because they don't know why they're being spied upon. They do not know why the government suddenly, charges them and send them emails and try to interrogate you without knowing what kind of purpose these kind of issues bring to them, right? Because we think that at the end, the sense of security that comes to individuals actually, okay, yes, close it.
Anyone knows, everyone knows anyone suddenly became a terrorist. How don't you think?
We don't think that anyone suddenly becomes a terrorist. We think that terrorist organizations works at a very very sophisticated level in a very underground, right? And we think that even actually talking about terrorists leads us to thinking that wiretapping is actually inefficient for the citizens. If the government really wants to target terrorists and particular extremist group, we think that they should use other mechanisms, not spying on the ordinary lifestyle of citizens. Because what wiretapping does is you basically tap around, you basically put these kind of programs upon the citizens' private accounts, such as email, such as telephone, and what you do is basically spying on these ordinary citizens in the kind of finding the word that might be like terrorist. We think that these kind of things is very abstract and that's very inefficient as well. But we think the further we're talking about the sense of security that really comes to individuals is guaranteeing, as I told you, guaranteeing security at individual level, right? Like the freedom that we feel in everyday life when we're talking to my friend, when we're talking to our lover, whatnot, right? And we think that when this kind of security, when citizens are aware that these kind of things could be distrusted and these kind of things can be doubted by domestic government, we think that is when these people feel very insecure and the mutual trust between the citizens and the government actually break down, which leads to more insecure society that citizens don't want to think about. Like for instance, when you look at the time of the Cold War period in East Germany, the reason why many of the artists and many of the very intellect want committed suicide was because of the sense of insecurity they got from their government spying on everyday life and everyday conversation that they share with their friends and their spouses, right? And we think that the overall level of happiness of the citizens actually go down, which destroys the quality of life, and that is not the true job of a government that we talk about today. For these reasons, we're very happy to oppose.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. We now call the Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, sir? Besides logic, let's use our common sense. If I'm a bad terrorist, I wouldn't say, guys, I'm going to bomb this building in a couple of seconds, so please know every single information from you. We believe that 9/11 or other a lot of infiltrated terrorists that happened in the United States happened very, very disclosed. Also, the citizens had no idea. Not even the government had any idea to do so. We believe that, of course, freedom and all those kind of values are important. We're not saying that freedom, we're going to show the finger to freedom itself. But we believe that, as they clearly mentioned, there has to be a line where we actually allow this freedom to be practiced. Of course, we're trying to, they're going to characterize this debate in terms of, oh, it's like a freedom debate, who better protects their freedom. Rather, we believe that it's a trade-off debate, whether or not privacy of these individual people to keep their intimate relationship with their lovers, compared to the security of their lives and the when it's in the populated of the millions and even the billions, how does the government react in this situation when they already conceded to the fact that terrorism is actually happening underground these days? So what is the way for the government to go? And that's going to exactly be answered through our two arguments. First thing, I'm going to talk about how the government's duty to protect their own citizens. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how it's a very effective means of actually tackling and preempting terrorism to begin with. A couple of responses towards the Prime Minister. They talked about, I gave them a PY and said, what about censorship or not? Because they said, oh, censorship has a direct harm. How does me typing backpack and then chloride into Google directly cause a harm to the society? Because we all saw the United States of America already going to people's houses once they thought these people typed in the same material that was used in the Boston bomb, Boston terror. The exact reason is because we allow censorship for a certain degree, and these people, if they're perfectly innocent, it has nothing to do with terrorism. We already saw people being perfectly okay with that situation of what they type in Google has been censored or not. The exact same logic, there is no direct harm for these people to type in those things in Google as much as their emails or their phones being checked up by the government at the end of the day. They talked about victimizing and making everyone guilty and that right is violated. Number one, the Miranda rights wasn't there for you to protect your freedom to speak. Rather, it was to inform the people because in case of they don't know about legal technicalities, they won't be disadvantaged. That's why the second part, you have to remain silent, is actually the next phrase is that in the case of you saying something, it might be used against you in the courts. That's the exact reason why Miranda debate has nothing to do with rights or freedom to begin with. But number two, as I said, if they're perfectly innocent, for example, I have no intentions to terrorism, but I was interested in guns and stuff because I think are cool, why does I have to actually be so detrimentally harmed by the government? Because I know for a fact that I have no intentions of terrorism, I'm perfectly fine to do so, right? But thirdly, they've talked about this trust idea where the government has to trust their kids like mommy and daddies. Why is this trust important in the first place? They never elaborate because this trust is important. Why? In the case of already infiltration happening, we're not only talking about now planes flying to New York City, we're actually talking about people within California or people within New York also having ties to Al-Qaeda and actually having those kind of links even domestically. How do we have to actually trust these people in general, right? Even if you agree that trust is the foremost way to go, we believe that trust will be destroyed and demolished, as we saw in the case of 9/11, where simply people choose not to trust the government because they fail to protect them. And then they talked about wiretapping, email tapping. It's a very bad way because you don't have a purpose. Number one, for wiretapping for your information, you have something called frequency control. Therefore, if you say a specific word, or if you say something that fits the frequency that's related to terrorism, you can directly censor those things. For email, the government does not have, number one, people or time to literally scroll down everything that you say with your lover. They have word censorships and filtering, something that's related to terrorism to begin with. So basically, the government doesn't give a care about your private intimate relationship, whether or not what you did last night. Rather, they're more interested in terms of finding very, very accurate information that's totally related to these things. That's why we believe that it's actually this is good. They talked about use other methods. Like what? We didn't see a single example come from the Prime Minister when they said this is really bad. But if you say use other methods, those other methods are also going to violate your freedom anyways. So we don't know what the hell the government is talking about today. I'm proud to propose this motion. Let's move on to the argumentations.
Before you move on, sir.
Nothing. I'm sorry. We think that the government has a duty in terms of protecting the citizens. Why? We think that's a basis, like social contract, where we offer our tax money, or also we offer sometimes military service towards the government in expectancy of them actually protecting our rights and actually protect our bodily autonomy or whatnot to be infringed. That's why we give a portion of those kind of rights and delegate that to the government. We saw it's a sacred duty of the government to actually do this because we saw in the case of 9/11, we saw the government, since they failed to keep up that social contract and their duty, they got massively criticized. So the next, the George administration, Bush administration, what they did was they actually had to decide, oh, we're going to spy onto every contents of the citizens. Actually, this got majority approval, not only the Republicans, but also the Democrats. We saw them approving. Outside the U.S. Parliament, we saw more than 270 congressmen signing the motion towards National Security Act. Why? Because they already have an agreement towards, we believe that kind of social stability or that kind of security is more important than a couple of those information that we might get in the process of doing so. Not only from California, but all the way to Texas, even Alaska and Hawaii, we saw people actually openly happy about those things. The problem with that model back then was because the government didn't have enough specific technology to track down accurate information, so they had to go into random information. Nowadays, technology has changed. We're not just talking about reading some of the comments and whatnot. We actually have a direct technology, as I mentioned in my rebuttals, to directly protect these people. So if the government has this capacity and the capability to execute this, why not do so? Because basically we believe that the scale of you being bombed and terrorized is much more greater than your violation of freedom to begin with. They actually have a burden to prove why that kind of freedom of me having a free soul and free spirit and all that kind of good stuff and fluffy stuff is more important than my own livelihood. When I can't trust my neighborhood whether or not he's a terrorist or not, in that situation the government does have a right to intervene and save that. Secondly, Secondly, talking about the effectiveness, why censorship is especially helpful. Number one, we believe that you can actually have the technology to catch the current infiltrated forces. We saw in the case of Snowden being massively criticized by the US government was because they were this close to actually reveal Al-Qaeda case related to within the United States. Basically, by Snowden revealing those kind of information to people that CIA is spying on you guys, that's the exact reason why we lost all ties with the terrorists to begin with. As I told you, terrorism is not just happening on a international basis, but it's now happening in more than a domestic case, like in the case we saw in Boston. How do we have spied on them beforehand? We believe that actually we couldn't catch those criminals to begin with. But moreover, we think that there's actually a preemption method. For example, if I'm a US citizen and some random terrorist guy approaches me, promising to give me a lot of money, basically now for the fact that I know I'm going to be spied, the government will check my contents and whatnot, I will not have an incentive to engage with those people and negotiate terms with the people, simply because I don't want to be treated as a terrorist by my government. So actually citizens will have an incentive to reject offers of terrorists. But more importantly, when it comes to terrorists as well, they will not have an incentive to approach the United States citizens or any other citizen because they know for a fact that once they try to contact them or reach them in the very first place, they'll be cut out by the government. That's why basically efficiency is massively guaranteed under the statute with technology. Mr. Speaker, this is a trade-off debate where we actually have to argue for a very hard thing, but we're proud to oppose this motion because we're actually going for the right way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader of Opposition. We now call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he said that basically this debate was about the trade-off. Now, all the government side then needs to, what we need to do is basically explain why this is not a trade-off that they are doing, because we're not achieving anything at the end of the day by spying, which will be, rebutted by me by me pointing out how this kind of way to tackle terrorism is ineffective from the very first place. But we also believe that what the opposition wasn't trying to achieve today is basically tackle our value of, how this social contract breaks from the very first place, right? They just said it's okay if we have certain benefits coming this policy. We don't think outcome always justifies all of the means that the society works by. We think there are always certain values that we need to keep within the society, which we succeeded to prove today. So basically, before I go into my arguments regarding how the imbalance of power between the government and citizens and how this actually targets specific people and blocks specific people from participating in open discourse in today's society, I'm first going to go into the rebuttals in an organized issue. So the first issue of this debate was basically about values, right? We already told you that this kind of social contract between the moment that we actually bring the principles of social contract is basically the government does trust the citizens that they are credible to pick, the good government and good protection, right? And therefore they provide protection with it. Firstly, that's why we have not just Miranda right, but we also have the principle of being innocent until proved guilty. The government generally assumes that unless there is a full proof, unless there is proof situation of these kind of people actually having been guilty, the government should not intervene in those kind of cases. We don't think this kind of protection or guideline mechanisms are always guaranteed in this kind of situation. But secondly, we also believe that the sense of protection that we give to the citizens still is more because if I live in Tennessee, for example, if my individual life and my individual right to privacy is even more important to me than the other events which happen, the problem is, Mr. Speaker, the citizens don't know what the exact reason for the government is intervening into these citizens' lives. We think it's perfectly okay if the government does tell citizens, I'm now going to wiretap into your household because we're really afraid of terrorism happening in your own neighborhood. We think that's different from the cases that we're talking about right now, right? Basically, we're talking about a situation where the citizens have no idea of whether the government is trying to spy them or not. The citizens doesn't know the justification of the government of carrying out those kind of actions in the first place. Therefore, in this kind of a situation, what citizens do care about is something that is close to them, right? Rather than a terrorism event that is not even guaranteed to happen, what they care about is their own lives being infringed and being monitored by the government at every second. We think that kind of sense of protection disappears from the country as a whole. We think this abstract kind of a security that is being accumulated in the country. also false, which actually leads to the increase of fear and the insecurity of the citizens. Going on to the next issue, when do we censor and control, right? Basically, they bring us the example of censorship. Censorship and yes, it's government control, but censorship and this kind of wiretapping is different from the very first place, as our Prime Minister has been talking about. You censor some things that actually harm and discriminate other people. For example, if I call you like a slut, then obviously that could be censored. We try to protect other people from, getting access to certain information that might harm them. That's why we censor, a lot of provocative measures to children. Censorship happens after the event has taken place. Whereas we told you of how the government is generally assuming that somebody is a criminal, how they're trying to preempt an event based on a vacuum that doesn't really need to happen. But even if it's based on a vacuum, even if it's based on a certain reason or certain ethnicities, we're also going to be telling you why that's harmful for the free society at the end of the day. So third reason, so we boil down to the question of does this really stop terrorism? Now he talks about how wiretapping could have stopped these kind of events, right? Firstly, terrorism, especially the domestic security or international security they're talking about, the terrorists are not stupid enough to call each other or email each other about the terror events from the very first place, Mr. Speaker. Basically, if they talk on the phone or emails, they are either, into codes that these kind of people cannot break, especially in the cases of, domestic terrorism. Basically, these people meet in secretive places, and they go onto the measures and they go really underground, which into the degree where wiretapping really can't cover. So we basically think that this kind of policy is ineffective from the first place, while increasing the amount of insecurity of the citizens at the end of the day. So we think it is the biggest harm, and yes.
Do you oppose policemen patrolling around a Harlem area because no one committed something bad, but for the sake of securing nothing goes wrong?
Basically, if policemen patrols around the area, they don't infringe into the citizens' private lives, right? They don't go into the household. They have no right to, infringe upon a criminal's household, without like a warrant, right? Without this kind of a license, right? That's why the sense of privacy is still protected under that kind of a specific law, whereas in this kind of case, if you're spying, you actually look into the lives of the citizens, and that's what makes them insecure. The sense of insecurity is different. Why? Because if a police is patrolling your household, that's the citizens get a sense of protection that the police might come help you when there is a problem. If policemen are listening to your calls, then basically you become then insecurity because you feel like you're being suspected. That's the difference between the policies that we're talking about. Now let's go into why there is an imbalance between powers between the citizens and government, and how the government actually specifically targets certain people and blocks certain people from, making, open discourse of freedom of speech. Basically, why? Because in America, in a lot of countries, there is already a stereotype that certain ethnicity or certain group of people are the ones who commit terror. That's why the imbalance of power is still going on, like racial profiling, like these kind of, unlicensed suspects, getting discriminated at the end of the day. We actually think that these kind of groups are aware of the fact that they are usually the first ones who are subjected under these kind of government surveillance. So basically, the citizens are aware of the fact that then the citizens, because the government can freely target anyone, and there's no counterpower against the citizens, that basically implies the fact that if you're a citizen that live in the United States of America or society, then basically if I'm like a Middle Eastern person, basically I'm especially the one who are going to be insecure. Why? Because I'm the first one who are going to be targeted by these kind of people. They basically know that if I start praising my own culture or my own religion, then I'm going to be the first target that the government is going to target. So the freedom of speech that I have, the right of respecting my culture is also going to be discriminated because of that governmental threat that might come to me at the end of the day, which basically just doesn't lead me to shutting up, which doesn't just allow my right to privacy or my right of protection, but it also specifically targets my ethnicities and my cultures right to express myself, right? But to further on these kind of whole social atmosphere actually targeting a certain person basically extends into the international society, we also think that this kind of sense actually makes these kind of sense of antagonization grow within those kind of specific cultural groups. That's why usually the most radical Middle Eastern terrorist group in Europe usually comes from these kind of children of Europeans where in the society they're discriminated under. So we think that under this kind of a case, social instability grows. We don't think this kind of discrimination or infringement upon the very rights of citizens to be trusted has to be upheld in Islamic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Prime Minister. Leslie. There we go.
The reason that the opposition side is taking the more moral high ground from the beginning is because we believe that life is more important than any other value. And values do change throughout the history. But we say life do not change. And rights and values means nothing when these people are dead. That's why we say we vote for the opposition side. Before moving on to the substances, several responses to the government side. They say it is harmful to intervene the right to privacy because people feel guilty and trust of the government decreases. We do not think so. Firstly, people do not feel guilty. Why is that so? Because people do not assume that government think that these people are criminals. For example, as the POI clearly explains that regardless of the fact that patrol is there, people do not assume that these people, they themselves are guilty, but rather the government is protecting these people. Rather, and more importantly, we say even if some of the people, minor people, feel guilty, we say there is a social consensus upon the spy. After 9/11 occurred, they feel that there should be a clear mechanism to prevent and preempt the terrorism, and that's why a lot of people had a social consensus regarding the spy. They do not feel guilty, but they feel proud to the government. No, thank you. They say trust of the government will decrease. We say trust of the government will decrease even more when government can save the lives of the people. We say therefore it is okay to violate some little rights to save the lives of the people. They say, yes.
The word spy means that there is no explicit consent and agreement between the state and the citizen.
Regardless of the fact that we agree upon the fact that there cannot be explicit consent, that's why we say there is a social consent regarding the spy. They actually do not feel that they are victimized or guilty, but rather they feel secured even more. They say that national security won't be there under our model because it is abstract sense of the security. We question you, is that really abstract sense of the security? We do not think so because fact actually proves that. What Edward Snowden actually revealed ironically is that dozens of the terrorism was preemptively taken down from the FBI, right? That clearly shows how mechanism works. Also from the analysis of the leader opposition, we clearly proved to you how calculation of the terrorists are actually changing. Also terrorists and also those who potentially can be the terrorists are actually changes, and we say that mechanism regarding the spy is actually working in the status quo.
Sir?
Regarding the no thank you, freedom of speech. And first response is we say it's not discriminatory because we're actually not spying a specific race or specific religion, but rather we're actually spying to catch the clear tie. When there is no clear tie between individuals to terrorism, we say it is actually not discriminating this individual. And it also leads to our third argument, which is freedom. We say that the model of the opposition is increasing the freedom of the individual, rather than restricting the individual freedom. Yes?
Even if you're not explicitly targeting the people, if United States government announces that it's likely to be Middle East, then Middle Eastern people are more insecure and they discourage themselves from these kind of things.
Yeah, that will be answered in our argument. Why? Right? The government side is continually claiming that the government is intervening the private life, that people will hesitate to make decisions like committing an immorality and talk about it and sharing the information between the people. And because the government is filtering everything. We have three responses for that. We say it's not true to begin with because government is not filtering everything. They filter when there is a clear distinction of the terrorism. We say it is actually filtering. So daily lives is not actually harmed. And they do still have a freedom of speech, and they do actively do that even within the United States of America, regardless of the fact that U.S. citizens recognize that their government is spying on these individuals. regarding small crimes, they still continually have to do that because the government, regardless of the fact that they catch the small crime through spying, they do not reveal that they recognize that these people did it because they have natural incentives to do so. Because when they reveal these small crimes through spy, they actually recognize that the international community is actually saying bad things to the United States, and as the national image is at stake, they do not care of these little things, but rather only regarding terrorism, they're actually spying and do take actions for that.
Sir.
Regarding the choice of the terrorism, we say we do not and happy to restrict choices regarding terrorism because it leads to the greater good, which is the lives of the people, and we say that only be made under our model, and it is failing under the model of the government side. No, thank you. And the reason why we say that choice and the freedom of the people can increase under our model. Why? Because we are making the better world, which is secure and trustful. We clearly prove to you why it is actually the mechanism and it is effectively working under our model. Imagine how much the freedom of the people were infringed and they feel insecure after 9/11. Freedom to move and freedom to gather within the people were restricted because they were simply feared to go out to the streets. They were simply feared to meet other people because of the notion that these people is a terrorism, and because of the notion that government do not have an ability, to protect these individuals. And we say the freedom of the people can only be made under the circumstances that people recognize that the street and the government that they're living in is so secure. And we say that they can practice more rights, like freedom to move and freedom to gather with individuals under our model when only government is so secure and actually they can do so without fear. And we say it is completely increasing the freedom of choice and the options for the choices. So we're actually taking the higher moral ground to begin with because we're saving the lives of the people from the beginning because the mechanism that we're proposing is so effective, and also we're actually having a higher moral ground because we are not actually limiting the choices of the individual, but rather increasing the options for these people to make a choice, and that's why we're very proud to oppose.